For 3 years, she couldn't give her husband the intimacy every wife dreams of. Her body was weak, her heart was broken, yet her love was stronger than pain. In a moment of desperation, she brought her best friend to please him. But what he did next will shake your soul, bring tears to your eyes, and remind you what true love really means. My dearest, most beautiful family, do you want to know who the most beautiful person on this earth is? Take your phone, open the camera, and look at your smile. You will find the masterpiece of God's creation. Stay blessed, stay loved, and prepare your heart. Because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It is an unforgettable journey of sacrifice, betrayal, healing, and the kind of love that only comes once in a lifetime. Sandra Williams Neeson stared at her reflection, seeing not weakness, but a woman preparing for war. The marble bathroom of their penthouse reflected everything money could buy, yet Sandra saw only what it couldn't fix. At 32, she possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations in boardrooms. Smooth, ebony skin that glowed with health, intelligent dark eyes that could dissect a marketing strategy in seconds, and a presence that commanded respect before she even spoke. But for 3 years, this body that housed such strength had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. She adjusted the silk robe around her shoulders, each movement calculated to hide the tension that lived in her muscles. Tonight, like every night for 1,095 days, she would lie beside her husband and pretend that the fire between them hadn't been extinguished by medical complications she couldn't control. Sandra. Liam's voice carried from their bedroom, warm with the Irish lilt that still made her pulse quicken after 6 years of marriage. "Everything all right, love?" "Just finishing up," she called back, forcing lightness into her tone. In the mirror, she practiced the smile that had built her marketing empire, confident, unshakable, revealing nothing of the storm beneath. Liam Neeson wasn't just any husband. At 35, he commanded a tech fortune worth $800 million. Yet he'd built it all while remaining the kind of man who still opened car doors and remembered the anniversary of their first kiss. 6 feet 2 inches of lean strength, with steel grey eyes that could see through any deception except the ones she crafted to protect him. Sandra had met him when she was nobody, a brilliant marketing graduate with more ambition than connections. He'd been the keynote speaker at a conference where she'd challenged his entire presentation during the Q&A session. While other attendees cringed at her audacity, Liam had smiled and asked her to dinner. "I need someone in my life who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong," he'd said. "Especially someone who's right as often as you are." She'd fallen in love with his mind first, then his heart, then everything else. Their early years had been electric, two ambitious people building empires by day and losing themselves in each other by night. Sandra had grown her boutique marketing firm into a powerhouse that rivaled agencies with 10 times her history. Liam had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure. Together, they were unstoppable, until 3 years ago, when endometriosis turned her body into a battlefield where intimacy became impossible. The doctors had explained it clinically. Endometrial tissue growing outside her uterus, causing pain so severe that physical closeness became agony. What they couldn't explain was how a woman who'd built her life on solving impossible problems was supposed to solve this one. "The treatment options are limited," Dr. Patterson had said, his voice carrying the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered bad news regularly. "We can manage the pain, but the condition itself, it's chronic. Some women find that symptoms improve over time, but others—" He hadn't finished that sentence. He hadn't needed to. Sandra walked into their bedroom, where Liam sat propped against the headboard, reading acquisition reports on his tablet. Even in pajamas, he radiated the kind of confidence that had built his fortune from nothing. His grey eyes lifted to meet hers, and she saw the flash of hope that appeared every time she entered their bedroom. Hope that tonight might be different, followed immediately by the guilt of wanting what he couldn't have. "How was the Morrison campaign presentation?" he asked, setting aside his work as she approached the bed. "Brilliant, naturally." Sandra settled beside him, maintaining the careful distance that had become their normal. "Increased their brand recognition by 43% in preliminary testing. They'll probably want to expand internationally." "Of course they will. You have that effect on people, making them want more than they ever thought possible." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings neither would voice. Sandra felt the familiar ache that had nothing to do with her medical condition and everything to do with watching the man she loved settle for half a marriage. Liam reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles across her knuckles. Such a simple touch, yet Sandra felt the restraint in it, the careful boundary he maintained even in this small intimacy. "I love you," he said quietly, as he did every night. "I love you too," she replied, as she did every night. But love wasn't enough to bridge the distance between wanting and having, between the life they'd planned and the reality they'd learned to navigate. As Liam turned off the light and settled into sleep, Sandra stared at the ceiling and felt something shifting inside her chest. Not the physical pain she'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper, a restlessness that felt like resolve. For 3 years, she'd accepted this as their new normal. She'd adapted, compromised, and endured because that's what strong women did. But lying there in the darkness, listening to her husband's careful breathing, Sandra realized she was tired of being strong in all the wrong ways. She'd built a marketing empire by refusing to accept that anything was impossible. She'd won Liam's heart by being brave enough to challenge him. She'd survived 3 years of medical hell by finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Maybe it was time to stop surviving and start fighting back. The thought crystallized in her mind with the clarity of a business plan. Sandra Williams Neeson hadn't become successful by accepting limitations. She'd done it by finding solutions everyone else said didn't exist. Tomorrow, she would begin the most important campaign of her life. Not for a client, not for profit, but for the chance to reclaim everything this condition had stolen from them. As sleep finally claimed her, Sandra's last conscious thought carried the weight of a declaration of war. Some battles are meant to be won. Chapter 2. The Impossible Proposition. Some conversations require liquid courage. Others require the courage of desperation. The rooftop bar overlooked Manhattan like a jeweled throne, the city lights stretching endlessly in every direction. Sandra chose this place deliberately, neutral, ground where the ambient noise would swallow difficult conversations, and the view would remind her why. She'd always aimed higher than everyone said was possible. At 23 stories above street level, the bar commanded a view that encompassed everything Sandra had built her life pursuing. The glittering towers of Midtown represented the business empire she'd constructed from nothing. The sprawling lights of the outer boroughs suggested the millions of people whose problems she solved daily through her marketing campaigns. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of ambition and achievement was the apartment where her husband waited, unaware that his wife was about to propose something that would either save their marriage or destroy their friendship. The bar itself was an exercise in calculated sophistication, crystal fixtures that caught and scattered light like captured stars, furniture that suggested wealth without ostentation, and a clientele that understood the difference between having money and needing to display it. Sandra had chosen this particular establishment because it was the kind of place where extraordinary conversations happened regularly, where million-dollar deals were structured over cocktails and life-changing decisions were made between appetizer and entree. Marilyn Monroe Washington arrived 15 minutes late. As always, her red dress commanding attention from every man within visual range. At 31, she possessed the kind of effortless glamour that made magazine editors fight for her attention. As the creative director of Vogue's digital division, she lived in a world where beauty was currency and charm was power. "You look terrible," Marilyn announced, sliding into the booth with characteristic directness. And before you argue, remember that I make my living identifying what's wrong with perfect pictures. Sandra managed a laugh. Always such a flatterer. It's why we're friends. I'm the only person who tells you the truth even when it's ugly. Marilyn signaled the bartender with practiced efficiency. 2 old fashions and make them strong. We're about to have the kind of conversation that requires pharmaceutical assistance. They'd been friends since college, when Sandra was the scholarship kid who studied, while Marilyn was the trust fund baby who partied. Opposites should have kept them apart. But Sandra's ambition fascinated Marilyn, while Marilyn's fearlessness inspired Sandra. 23 years later, they were still each other's opposite and most trusted advisor. Their friendship had survived everything. Sandra's meteoric rise in the marketing world, while Marilyn navigated the treacherous politics of fashion media, relationships that ended badly, family dramas, professional setbacks and personal triumphs. They'd been each other's maid of honor, emergency contact, and voice of reason during every major life decision. But tonight's conversation would test the boundaries of even their extraordinary bond. You called this meeting, Marilyn said once their drinks arrived. Usually when you summon me to expensive bars with cryptic texts, it's because you're about to ask for something impossible. Sandra took a long sip of her drink, feeling the bourbon burn away some of her carefully maintained composure. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan pulsed with the energy of 8 million people pursuing their dreams, their obsessions, their desperate schemes to get what they wanted. She'd spent the afternoon walking through Central Park, trying to find courage for this conversation, watching couples stroll hand in hand, families playing together, people whose bodies hadn't betrayed their most fundamental desires. The spring air had been warm with promise, everything around her celebrating life and fertility and the kind of easy intimacy she could no longer access. I need to ask you something that might destroy our friendship, Sandra said finally. Interesting opening. Continue. Sandra had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, approaching it like a client presentation. She'd analyzed every possible response, prepared for every objection, crafted arguments for why this made logical sense. But sitting across from her best friend, all that preparation crumbled into simple, desperate honesty. I can't be intimate with my husband. Haven't been able to for 3 years. Medical condition, doesn't matter what exactly. What matters is that I'm watching the man I love slowly die from loneliness while pretending everything is fine. Marilyn's expression shifted from curiosity to concern, her professional composure replaced by the genuine worry of someone who'd known Sandra long enough to recognize when her formidable control was finally cracking. Sandra, let me finish, please. Sandra's voice carried the authority that had built her career. I've tried everything. Doctors, specialists, treatments, therapy. Nothing works. Liam pretends it doesn't matter, but I see how he looks at other couples. I see how he turns away when love scenes come on in movies. I see how he started working later and later just to avoid coming to bed. The words came faster now, 3 years of suppressed emotion finally finding voice. Sandra felt like a dam bursting, all the careful control she'd maintained finally giving way to raw truth. I'm losing him. Not to another woman, which would almost be easier to fight. I'm losing him to resignation, to this slow acceptance that this is just our life now. And I can't. I won't let that happen. Marilyn leaned forward, her professional composure replaced by genuine worry. Around them, the bar hummed with the conversations of people whose problems seemed manageable compared to the impossible situation Sandra was describing. What exactly are you asking me? Sandra met her eyes directly, calling on every ounce of strength that had carried her through boardroom battles and impossible client demands. I'm asking if you would consider helping us, being with him, giving him what I can't. The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Around them, the bar hummed with conversation and laughter. The soundtrack of people whose problems were simpler than navigating the mathematics of love and loss. Sandra watched Marilyn process the request, seeing surprise give way to understanding, then to something that looked almost like grief. She'd expected shock, outrage, immediate refusal. What she hadn't expected was the compassionate recognition that crossed Marilyn's features. "You want me to sleep with your husband," Marilyn said finally. "I want you to save my marriage. Those aren't the same thing, Sandra, aren't they?" Sandra pulled out her phone, showing Marilyn a series of screenshots. "I've researched this. Polyamorous arrangements, platonic intimacy contracts, therapeutic sexual partnerships. It's more common than you'd think." The screenshots represented hours of research, late nights spent exploring possibilities she'd never imagined considering, forums where couples discussed similar arrangements, academic studies on alternative relationship structures, legal frameworks for non-traditional partnerships. Sandra had approached her marriage crisis with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to impossible marketing challenges. Marilyn stared at the phone, then at Sandra. "You researched this. Of course you did. You've turned your marriage into a case study. I've turned my marriage into a problem that needs solving. That's what I do. I solve impossible problems. And you think I'm the solution. I think you're the only person I trust enough to ask. You're beautiful, you're discreet. You understand complicated situations," and Sandra's voice broke slightly. "And you're the only person who loves me enough to consider doing something this insane." Marilyn drained her drink in one long swallow. "Do you hear yourself right now? You're talking about lending out your husband like he's a car. I'm talking about being practical about an impossible situation. You're talking about giving up." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Sandra felt her carefully constructed arguments crumble, revealing the raw desperation beneath. For 3 years, she'd prided herself on adapting to impossible circumstances, on finding strength to endure what couldn't be changed. But sitting here making this request of her oldest friend, she realized how far she'd fallen from the woman who'd built an empire by refusing to accept defeat. "I'm trying to save what we have before we lose everything," she whispered. Marilyn reached across the table and took Sandra's hands. Her fingers were warm, steady, real in a way that made Sandra realize how long it had been since someone had touched her without careful calculation. "Sandra, listen to me very carefully. You are the strongest woman I know. You've built an empire, survived medical hell, and maintained a marriage under impossible circumstances. But this isn't strength. This is surrender disguised as strategy. What else am I supposed to do? Fight. Not for alternative arrangements or practical solutions. Fight for yourself. Fight for your marriage. Fight for the possibility that there might be answers you haven't found yet." Sandra felt tears threatening and forced them back. She didn't cry. Crying was for people who gave up, and she'd never given up on anything in her life. "I've tried everything, Marilyn." "Have you? Or have you tried everything safe? Everything that lets you maintain control and dignity while avoiding the real risk?" "What real risk?" Marilyn's smile was gentle but implacable. "The risk of hoping for a miracle instead of settling for a compromise." As they sat in silence, Sandra felt something crack inside her chest. Not the physical pain she'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper. The careful walls she'd built around her hope, her faith in possibilities beyond what doctors could provide. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Of course you are. You're scared that if you hope for real healing and it doesn't come, you'll lose even the pretense of normal you've managed to maintain." Sandra nodded, unable to speak. "But here's the thing about you that you seem to have forgotten," Marilyn continued. "You've never chosen safe over impossible. Not when you started your company, not when you fell in love with Liam, not ever. Don't start now." As they left the bar, Sandra felt the weight of her proposition settling differently around her shoulders. Not as the solution to her problems, but as the clearest possible evidence of how lost she'd become. But sometimes Marilyn's voice echoed in her mind. Getting lost is the first step toward finding something better than what you were originally looking for. Chapter I-3, The Rejection That Changed Everything. Truth has a way of arriving at the most inconvenient moments. Liam's study occupied the entire north corner of their penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Central Park, while his dual monitors displayed the kind of complex financial data that had built his empire. At 11:30 p.m., he should have been exhausted, but Sandra could see the telltale signs of a mind too restless for sleep. She stood in the doorway, watching him work with the fluid efficiency that had attracted her years ago. Even in casual clothes, he radiated the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars. His fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, occasionally pausing to make notes on the legal pad beside his coffee cup. The study itself was Liam's sanctuary, mahogany shelves lined with first-edition books on business strategy and philosophy, awards from industry organizations, and photographs from their travels together when life had been simpler. The soft amber lighting created an atmosphere of focused intensity, the kind of environment where billion-dollar deals were structured and impossible problems were solved. Sandra noticed the coffee cup beside his laptop, his third of the evening, judging by the slightly trembling hand that suggested too much caffeine and too little sleep. He'd been working later and later recently, staying in his study until she was already asleep, avoiding the bedroom routines that had once been the natural conclusion to their days. The Morrison acquisition, Sandra asked, stepping into the room, finalized the terms an hour ago. They accepted our offer. Liam glanced up, his grey eyes immediately focusing with the intensity that had first caught her attention at that conference 6 years ago. Couldn't sleep either. Sandra moved to the window, using the view as an excuse to avoid his direct gaze. Central Park stretched below them, like a dark ocean, dotted with the occasional light from late-night joggers and couples walking hand in hand. Even at this late hour, the city pulsed with life, people living fully, loving freely, taking for granted the simple pleasures that had been stolen from her marriage. I need to discuss something with you. A proposition. Liam's attention sharpened. After 6 years of marriage, he knew the difference between Sandra's casual conversation voice and her business presentation tone. This was definitely the latter. He'd heard this same inflection when she pitched to Fortune 500 CEOs, when she negotiated impossible deals, when she transformed struggling companies into market leaders. But he'd never heard it directed at their personal life before. All right. He closed his laptop and turned to face her completely. You have my full attention. Sandra had rehearsed this conversation, approaching it with the same methodical preparation she brought to client presentations. She'd anticipated objections, prepared counter-arguments, and planned strategic responses to every possible reaction. But standing here in the intimacy of his private workspace, her carefully planned words felt suddenly inadequate. She'd approached their marriage problem like a marketing campaign. But looking at Liam now, really looking at him, she realized she'd been treating symptoms instead of causes. We need to address our situation, she began, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. 3 years is a long time for any man to go without. Physical intimacy. I see how it affects you, even when you try to hide it. Liam's expression grew carefully neutral, the same mask he wore during difficult business negotiations. Sandra recognized the look. It was his poker face, the expression that had helped him navigate hostile takeover attempts and boardroom coups. But she also saw the slight tightening around his eyes that betrayed deeper emotion beneath the surface. Sandra, please, let me finish. She moved closer, drawing on every ounce of confidence that had built her career. I've been thinking about practical solutions, alternative arrangements that might work for both of us. What kind of arrangements? Sandra took a deep breath, steeling herself for the most difficult pitch of her professional life. Marilyn and I had dinner tonight. I asked her if she might be willing to help us, to provide what I can't. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Liam's expression didn't change, but Sandra saw something shift in his eyes. Not anger, but something that looked almost like grief. She watched his jaw clench slightly, a muscle ticking with the effort of maintaining composure. "You asked Marilyn to sleep with me," he said finally, his voice carefully modulated. "I asked her to help save our marriage. By sleeping with me. By giving you what you need so we don't lose everything else we have." Sandra felt her confidence wavering as she watched Liam process her words. She'd expected anger, shock, even relief. What she hadn't expected was this quiet devastation that seemed to settle over him like a heavy blanket. Liam stood slowly, moving to the window where Sandra waited. For a moment, they stood side by side, looking out at the city that had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, their gradual drift into this careful distance. Sandra could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to touch, but separated by an emotional chasm she'd apparently misjudged. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked quietly. "A woman who can't fulfill her basic obligations as a wife." The words came out more bitter than Sandra intended, revealing the self-loathing she'd carefully hidden for 3 years. She saw Liam flinch at her tone, saw him struggle with how to respond to such devastating self-assessment. Liam turned to face her fully, his hands settling on her shoulders with gentle firmness. "I see the woman who challenged me in front of 200 people because she knew I was wrong. I see the brilliant mind that built a marketing empire from nothing. I see the person who makes me laugh even on my worst days, who remembers every important date in our relationship, who still gets excited about new projects like she's discovering fire." His voice carried conviction that surprised Sandra with its intensity. This wasn't comfort or platitude. This was truth, delivered with the force of absolute certainty. "I see the woman who negotiated our first joint investment by reading the other party so perfectly that they ended up paying us for the privilege of giving us exactly what we wanted. I see the partner who helped me navigate my father's death, who stayed up with me for 3 nights straight when the company almost failed, who celebrated every victory and mourned every setback as if they were her own." Sandra felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack under the weight of his conviction. "But I can't." "You can't what? Give me sex?" "Sandra, do you honestly think that's what I married?" "It's part of marriage, an important part. It's one part of a relationship that encompasses everything from intellectual partnership to emotional support to shared dreams to daily laughter to the simple pleasure of knowing that the person I love most in the world chooses to build a life with me every single day." Liam's voice grew stronger, more certain. "You think I've been suffering for 3 years? You think I've been slowly dying of loneliness while pretending everything is fine? Haven't you been? Sandra, I've been watching the strongest woman I know slowly convince herself she's not enough. I've been watching my brilliant, fierce, incredible wife disappear into shame about something that isn't her fault and doesn't define her worth." Sandra felt tears threatening and fought them back. "But I see how you look at other couples. I see how you avoid. I look at other couples and wonder if they have what we have, the deep stuff, the real stuff. And I avoid intimate scenes in movies because they make me sad, not because I'm missing sex, but because I'm watching you suffer, and I can't fix it." The words hit Sandra like physical blows, destroying every assumption she'd built her proposition on. She'd constructed an entire narrative around Liam's supposed suffering, his imagined resentment, his theoretical need for what she couldn't provide. But the man standing before her bore no resemblance to the frustrated husband of her imagination. "I don't want Marilyn," Liam continued, his voice carrying absolute finality. "I don't want any alternative arrangement or practical solution. I want my wife, all of her, including the parts that are struggling right now, to understand that she is enough. More than enough, everything. But for how long? Sandra's voice broke on the question that had haunted her for 3 years. How long before you start resenting me? How long before you start wondering what it would be like with someone who could give you everything? Liam was quiet for a long moment, and Sandra braced herself for the truth she'd been dreading. She watched his face, searching for signs of the doubt she was certain must exist somewhere beneath his declarations of devotion. "Do you remember our wedding vows?" he asked finally. "Of course. What did we promise each other? In sickness and in health, for better or worse, we promised to choose each other. Every day, through everything. Not just the easy parts, Sandra. All of it." He took her hands, and Sandra was startled to realize they were shaking, not hers, but his. For the first time since she'd entered his study, she saw vulnerability crack through his controlled exterior. "I choose you when you're confident and when you're scared, when you're healthy and when you're hurting, when you can give me everything and when you can barely give me half. I don't choose you conditionally based on what you can provide. I choose you because you're you." Sandra felt something breaking open in her chest. 3 years of carefully contained emotion finally demanding release. "I choose you too," she whispered. "But I don't know how to stop feeling like I'm failing you. Then we figure it out together, not by finding substitutes or alternative arrangements, but by fighting this thing as a team." As Sandra finally let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since her diagnosis, she felt Liam's arms come around her with a certainty that spoke of promises kept and love that ran deeper than any physical expression. "We're going to beat this," he whispered against her hair. "Not because I need you to be different than you are, but because you deserve to feel whole again. Because we deserve to have all of each other back." Standing in his study, held by the man who just refused to accept anything less than real healing, Sandra felt the first stirring of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope that wasn't contingent on compromise. Chapter 4. The Husband's Mission. Every revolution starts with a single person saying, "Enough." At 4:30 in the morning, while Sandra slept deeply for the first time in months, Liam sat in his study, surrounded by medical journals, research papers, and the kind of determination that had built his fortune from nothing. The conversation 3 nights ago had changed everything, crystallizing his purpose with laser focus. He'd spent 18 months watching his wife suffer while feeling helpless. That ended now. The laptop screen glowed with search results that would have overwhelmed most people. But Liam approached Sandra's condition the same way he approached hostile takeovers, with systematic intelligence gathering and unlimited resources. He'd already identified the top 50 endometriosis specialists worldwide, cross-referenced their success rates, and begun building a database of treatment protocols that showed real results. His study had been transformed into something resembling a military command center. 3 monitors displayed different research databases, while printed papers covered every available surface. A whiteboard mounted on the far wall showed a complex flowchart of treatment approaches, success rates, and potential combinations. Empty coffee cups testified to the hours he'd already invested in this campaign. The scope of his research would have impressed academic investigators. He'd purchased access to every major medical database, subscribed to specialized journals, and contacted research institutions across 4 continents. His business background had taught him that information was power, but information combined with unlimited resources was transformational. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison topped his list. Based in Zurich, she'd pioneered a combination therapy approach that boasted a 73% success rate for patients with Sandra's specific presentation. Her research papers read like battlefield reports from someone who declared war on impossible medical cases and kept winning. But Dr. Morrison wasn't the only weapon in the arsenal Liam was assembling. He'd identified specialists in London, Barcelona, Tokyo, and Boston who were pursuing different innovative approaches. Each represented a piece of the puzzle that might restore Sandra's health, but no single doctor possessed all the necessary components. That's where Liam's business expertise became crucial. He understood how to coordinate complex projects involving multiple stakeholders across different time zones and regulatory environments. What most patients experienced as disconnected medical care, he would orchestrate as a comprehensive campaign. Liam reached for his phone, calculating the time difference. 6:30 a.m. in Switzerland, too early for most people. But Dr. Morrison's published schedule suggested she started her days before sunrise. Dr. Morrison's office. This is Katrin speaking. Good morning. This is Liam Neeson calling from New York. I need to schedule a consultation with Dr. Morrison regarding my wife's condition. Certainly. Mr. Neeson, Dr. Morrison is accepting new patients, but her waiting list currently extends to... I'm calling to discuss a priority consultation. Time is not a constraint, nor is geographic location. I can have my wife in Zurich within 24 hours if necessary. Liam's tone carried the quiet authority that had negotiated billion-dollar deals, not aggressive, but implacably certain that obstacles were simply problems requiring creative solutions. I see. May I ask what specific condition we're discussing? Advanced endometriosis, unresponsive to conventional treatment protocols. My wife has been suffering for 3 years with minimal relief from multiple specialists. There was a pause as Katrin consulted her computer. Mr. Neeson, I'm going to transfer you directly to Dr. Morrison. She handles all priority cases personally. The line clicked, and moments later, a crisp Swiss accent filled the study. Mr. Neeson, this is Dr. Morrison. I understand your wife has been struggling with endometriosis. For 3 years, she's seen specialists in New York, Boston, and Los Angeles. Various treatment approaches have provided minimal relief. Tell me about her symptoms and previous treatments. For the next 20 minutes, Liam detailed every aspect of Sandra's condition with the precision of someone who'd made it his business to understand every facet of the problem. He'd memorized her medical records, researched every medication she'd tried, and documented every symptom with the thoroughness of a military intelligence report. He'd spent weeks learning medical terminology, studying anatomical diagrams, and understanding the complex interplay of hormones, inflammation, and nerve response that characterized Sandra's condition. What had begun as helpless observation had transformed into expertise that rivaled many general practitioners. Dr. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking questions that revealed both her expertise and her genuine interest in Sandra's case. Mr. Neeson, your wife's presentation is complex but not hopeless. I've treated similar cases with significant success using a combination of surgical intervention, targeted hormone therapy, and specialized physical rehabilitation. What kind of success rates are we discussing? For patients with her specific symptom profile, I've achieved meaningful improvement in approximately 75% of cases. Complete resolution of pain and restoration of normal intimate function occurs in roughly 60%. Liam felt something shift in his chest, the first real hope he'd allowed himself in 3 years. But his business training kept him focused on details rather than emotional responses. What would treatment involve? Initial consultation and assessment, followed by a customized treatment protocol. The process typically takes 6 to 8 months, with patients visiting Zurich monthly for the first 3 months, then as needed for maintenance. Cost is not a factor. Schedule is flexible. What's the earliest you could see her? I have an opening next Friday. However, Mr. Neeson, I need to ask, is your wife aware you're making this call? The question stopped Liam cold. In his determination to find solutions, he'd momentarily forgotten that Sandra valued her autonomy above almost everything else. Not yet, but she will be. I strongly recommend discussing this with her before we proceed. My treatment approach requires complete patient commitment and active participation. It cannot be imposed, even with the best intentions. After ending the call, Liam stared out at the pre-dawn darkness and considered his next moves. Sandra needed to be part of this decision, but she also needed to see that real options existed beyond the compromises she'd been contemplating. He opened a new browser window and began researching flights to Zurich. By 6 a.m., Liam had contacted 12 more specialists across 4 countries. Each conversation revealed new possibilities, different approaches, innovative treatments that hadn't been available. When Sandra first sought help, Dr. James Patterson in London had developed a nerve block technique showing promising results. Dr. Sarah Chen in Tokyo was pioneering genetic therapy approaches. Dr. Maria Santos in Barcelona combined traditional medicine with cutting-edge immunotherapy. The picture emerging from his research was clear. Sandra's condition wasn't the hopeless situation they'd been led to believe. Medical science had advanced significantly in the 3 years since her initial diagnosis, but staying current with those advances required constant vigilance and unlimited resources, both of which Liam possessed in abundance. He created a secure folder on his computer, organizing every piece of information by potential effectiveness and timeline. Treatment protocols, success stories, patient testimonials, cost analyses, logistics planning, everything Sandra would need to make an informed decision about reclaiming her health. The folder already contained over 200 documents representing dozens of hours of research. But this was just the beginning. Liam had learned that truly innovative medical care required treating each case as unique, assembling custom solutions from the best available components, regardless of cost or complexity. At 7 a.m., he heard Sandra stirring in their bedroom. Soon, she'd emerge for coffee and her morning review of overnight emails. Following the routine that had structured their lives for 6 years, Liam saved his work and closed the laptop. But the sense of purpose remained blazing in his chest. For 18 months, he'd felt helpless watching Sandra suffer. That helplessness ended today. He'd spent his career turning impossible situations into profitable outcomes. Healing his wife might be the most important deal he'd ever negotiate, but the fundamental approach remained the same. Identify the problem, research every available solution, deploy unlimited resources toward the optimal outcome. Sandra appeared in the doorway wearing the silk robe that had become her armor, coffee cup already in hand. "You're up early," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." The Morrison acquisition. Liam looked at his wife, really looked at her. Beneath the carefully maintained composure, he saw exhaustion, resignation, and the kind of quiet desperation that came from fighting a losing battle for too long. Not Morrison. Something more important. Sandra's eyes sharpened with curiosity and just a hint of concern. "I've been doing some research," Liam continued carefully, "about your condition, about treatment options we might not have fully explored." He saw Sandra's expression close slightly, the automatic defensive response she'd developed to medical discussions. "Liam, we've been through this. I've seen the best specialists, tried every treatment. There's no magic bullet. Maybe not. But there are specialists we haven't consulted and treatments that didn't exist 3 years ago." Liam opened his laptop and turned the screen towards Sandra, showing her Dr. Morrison's research publication. "This woman has achieved remarkable results with cases similar to yours. Her approach is different from anything you've tried." Sandra read silently for several minutes, and Liam watched hope and skepticism war across her features. "Liam, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not trying to do anything except give you every possible option for getting your life back." The intensity in his voice made Sandra look up from the screen. "This isn't about me needing you to be different," Liam continued. "This is about you deserving every chance to be whole again. Not for my sake, but for yours." As Sandra continued reading, Liam saw something shift in her expression. Not quite hope yet, but curiosity. The same intellectual engagement that had built her career was focusing on the possibility of solutions instead of the certainty of limitations. "When could we see her?" Sandra asked finally. "Next Friday, if you want. I can have us in Zurich by Thursday night." Sandra looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen in months, surprise mixed with something that might become gratitude. "You've really researched this thoroughly, haven't you?" "I've barely started," Liam replied. "Meaning every word." Chapter 5, The Secret Campaign Heroes. Aren't born in moments of triumph, they're carved out in months of silent battles. 3 weeks after their first consultation with Dr. Morrison, Sandra's treatment began in earnest, though she had no idea of the intricate logistics happening behind the scenes. While she focused on following medical protocols and enduring the challenging therapy sessions, Liam orchestrated a complex campaign that would have impressed military strategists. His personal assistant, David Chen, had been sworn to absolute secrecy regarding what was now internally referred to as Project Restoration. David's official job was managing Liam's business schedule. His unofficial job had become coordinating an international medical campaign involving specialists across 4 continents. The transformation of Liam's professional life was remarkable. The man who'd once personally overseen every major business decision had systematically delegated responsibilities to his executive team, freeing himself to focus entirely on Sandra's healing. Board meetings that once commanded his full attention now received abbreviated appearances. Acquisition opportunities that would have previously consumed weeks of analysis were approved or rejected based on quick reviews by his investment team. Dr. Patterson's office called from London, David reported during their daily 7 a.m. briefing. They've reviewed Mrs. Neeson's latest lab results and want to adjust the hormone therapy protocol. Dr. Morrison agrees, but recommends consultation with Dr. Santos in Barcelona first. Liam nodded, making notes on the encrypted tablet he now carried everywhere. Schedule the video conference with all 3 for Thursday. Make sure it's during Sandra's marketing presentation to the Goldman account. She'll be occupied for 3 hours. Already arranged. Also, the specialized equipment Dr. Morrison requested arrived yesterday. The physical therapy team has been briefed on installation and setup. The equipment in question was a sophisticated biofeedback system that cost more than most people's cars. It had been custom modified by German engineers to address Sandra's specific needs, then flown to New York on Liam's private jet, along with the technician who would calibrate it for optimal effectiveness. Excellent. What about the nutrition specialist? Dean. Dr. Williams from the Cleveland Clinic confirmed she can work with Mrs. Neeson remotely. She's prepared a customized anti-inflammatory protocol that should complement the other treatments. Liam had learned that treating Sandra's condition required a multidisciplinary approach, none of whom previous doctors had attempted. Dr. Morrison's methodology involved surgical intervention, hormone therapy, specialized physical therapy, nutritional optimization, stress management, and psychological support, all coordinated with precision timing. The coordination alone was a full-time job, which is why Liam had essentially delegated most of his business responsibilities to his executive team. His primary focus had become project managing Sandra's healing with the same intensity he'd once devoted to building his empire. Any word from the pharmaceutical team in Germany? The custom compound will be ready next week. Dr. Muller suggests starting with the lower dosage to assess tolerance. Every aspect of Sandra's treatment involved custom solutions. The specialists Liam had assembled didn't offer standard protocols. They created personalized approaches based on detailed analysis of her specific case. It was medicine practiced at the level of art, available only to patients who could access the best minds in the field and afford unlimited customization. The financial investment was staggering. Between specialist consultations, custom medications, advanced diagnostic equipment, and coordinating care across multiple time zones, Liam was spending more monthly on Sandra's treatment than most people earned in a year. He considered it the best money he'd ever spent, but the true cost wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the complete reorganization of his life around Sandra's healing. Meetings that conflicted with her treatment schedule were moved or cancelled. Business trips were eliminated unless they coincided with Sandra's recovery periods. Even social obligations were evaluated based on whether they might interfere with her rest or treatment protocols. Sandra emerged from their bedroom wearing the professional armor that signaled another day of managing her marketing empire while secretly fighting for her health. She looked stronger than she had in months, though Liam could see the careful way she moved that indicated her pain levels were still significant. "The Barcelona consultation is today," she asked, accepting the coffee he'd prepared exactly the way she preferred. 2 p.m. our time. David has the secure video link set up in the study, and Dr. Morrison thinks this new approach might help with the inflammation. You see, she's optimistic. Dr. Santos has seen excellent results with similar cases. What Sandra didn't know was that Dr. Santos had spent 2 hours yesterday reviewing her case with specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Harvard Medical School. The consultation she'd be participating in was actually the culmination of a week-long collaborative review involving some of the world's leading experts. Liam had learned that truly innovative medical care required treating each patient as a unique research project. Sandra's case had become the focus of an informal international consortium of specialists who were as intrigued by the intellectual challenge as they were committed to helping her heal. The consortium met weekly via secure video conference, sharing insights and collaborating on treatment refinements with the kind of intellectual intensity usually reserved for groundbreaking research projects. Sandra's condition had become a fascinating case study for some of the world's most innovative medical minds. "I should warn you," Sandra said carefully. "I'm starting to hope this might actually work." "That scares me. Why does hope scare you?" "Because if this doesn't work, if these amazing specialists with their cutting-edge treatments can't help me, then I really am out of options." Liam set down his coffee and moved to stand behind Sandra's chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. Through the silk of her blouse, he could feel the tension she carried like armor. "Then we'll find other options. I've barely scratched the surface of what's available. There are research hospitals, experimental treatments, clinical trials we haven't even investigated yet." "Liam, you can't spend your entire life trying to fix me." "I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying to help you reclaim what's yours." The distinction mattered more than Sandra realized. In Liam's mind, this wasn't about repairing something broken. It was about recovering something stolen by circumstances beyond anyone's control. That afternoon, while Sandra participated in her Barcelona consultation, Liam coordinated 3 separate strategy calls. Dr. Morrison briefed him on the surgical options. They might need to consider if the current protocols didn't provide sufficient relief. Dr. Patterson outlined a new nerve therapy technique that showed promise but required collaboration with specialists in Boston. Dr. Chen shared preliminary results from genetic testing that suggested Sandra might be an ideal candidate for experimental treatments not yet available in the United States. Each conversation reinforced Liam's growing conviction that Sandra's healing wasn't just possible, it was probable, given sufficient resources and coordination. The challenge, Dr. Morrison explained during their private call, is that your wife's case requires innovations that exist at different medical centers around the world. No single institution has everything she needs. That's why we're creating our own institution, Liam replied, using the best people and best approaches regardless of geography. It's an expensive way to practice medicine. It's an effective way to practice medicine. The expense is irrelevant. The truth was that Liam had already spent more on Sandra's treatment than most people would earn in their lifetimes. But the money felt insignificant compared to the possibility of reclaiming their complete partnership. What price could be placed on watching Sandra laugh without reservation again? What cost was too high for restoring the intimacy that had been the foundation of their love? By evening, Sandra seemed lighter than she had in weeks. The Barcelona consultation had gone well, with Dr. Santos optimistic about adjusting her treatment protocol to address persistent inflammation issues. "I think I'm actually getting better," she said over dinner. "Not just managing the pain, but actually healing." "You are getting better," Liam confirmed. "Every specialist can see the progress." What Sandra didn't know was that her progress was being monitored by a team of experts who communicated daily about her case. Her healing wasn't happening in isolation. It was the result of carefully coordinated interventions designed by some of the world's most innovative minds. I keep wondering how different things might have been if I'd found Dr. Morrison 3 years ago. Sandra mused. "Don't look backward," Liam said gently. "Look forward. Focus on where we're going, not where we've been." As they prepared for bed, following the careful routines that had become their normal, Liam reflected on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. Sandra was sleeping better, moving with less obvious pain, and most importantly, talking about the future with something that resembled genuine optimism. The international medical team was cautiously encouraged by her response to treatment, though everyone agreed the real test would come over the next few months as they moved into more advanced interventions. Liam fell asleep planning the next phase of Sandra's campaign for healing, his mind already working through logistics for the surgical consultation scheduled for next month and the specialized rehabilitation program Dr. Morrison had designed specifically for her case. Some battles, he'd learned, required not just courage and determination, but the wisdom to assemble the right army and the resources to sustain a long campaign. Sandra's war against her condition would be won not through single heroic efforts, but through sustained, coordinated excellence applied relentlessly until victory was achieved. Chapter 6. The Breakthrough Moment. Miracles aren't magical, they're the reward for refusing to quit. Sandra woke on a Tuesday morning in April and realized something was different. For the first time in 1,127 days, she opened her eyes without immediately cataloging levels of pain or calculating how much discomfort she could endure before admitting defeat. She lay perfectly still, afraid to move and shatter whatever spell had settled over her body during the night. The morning light filtered through their bedroom windows with the kind of golden warmth that promised spring. And Sandra felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the absence of suffering as a baseline condition. Carefully, she shifted position in bed. No sharp stabbing sensation, no deep ache that seemed to originate in her bones, no burning tension that made every movement a negotiation with agony. "Liam," she whispered, not wanting to wake him but needing to share this moment with someone. He stirred immediately. The kind of instant alertness that came from months of monitoring her condition, even in sleep. "What is it? Are you all right?" I think I might be better." Liam turned to face her fully, his grey eyes immediately focusing with laser intensity. "Better how?" "I don't hurt. Right now, in this moment, I don't hurt at all." They both held their breath, as if speaking too loudly might summon back the pain that had defined Sandra's existence for so long. The silence stretched between them, filled with cautious hope and the shared understanding that this could be temporary relief rather than genuine healing. Sandra sat up slowly, testing each movement like a scientist conducting a crucial experiment. Her body responded without protest, muscles flexing smoothly, joints moving freely. She felt like a prisoner discovering the cell door had been left unlocked. "It's really gone," she said, wonder replacing caution in her voice. "The pain is really gone." Liam sat up beside her, his hand settling on her lower back where the worst pain typically concentrated. His touch was warm and steady, no longer carrying the careful restraint that had characterized their physical contact for years. "How do you feel?" "Like myself. Like my actual self, not this broken version I've been carrying around." Sandra stood and walked to their bathroom, marveling at the simple pleasure of movement without calculation. In the mirror, she saw something she'd almost forgotten, her own face without the subtle tension that chronic pain carved into a person's features. The woman looking back at her had clear eyes, relaxed shoulders, and an expression of genuine surprise. This was who she'd been before endometriosis rewrote the terms of her existence. "Dr. Morrison did warn us that breakthrough days could happen suddenly," Liam said from the bedroom. "She said your body might reach a tipping point where all the treatments converged into significant relief." Sandra returned to sit beside him, taking his hand in both of hers. His fingers were strong and familiar, but touching him now felt different, not careful or calculated, but natural. "Liam, what if this is real? What if the treatments actually worked? Then we celebrate, and we stay vigilant to maintain whatever progress we've achieved. But what if it's temporary? What if I wake up tomorrow and everything hurts again?" "Then we keep fighting. We adjust protocols. We try new approaches. We refuse to accept defeat." Sandra studied her husband's face, seeing determination that ran deeper than any business deal or professional challenge. Over the past 6 months, while she'd focused on enduring treatments and following medical protocols, Liam had been waging his own campaign with an intensity that humbled her. "You never gave up, did you? Even when I was ready to accept that this was just our life now, I couldn't give up. Giving up would have meant accepting that the woman I love was condemned to suffer indefinitely. That wasn't acceptable." Sandra leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid reality of his presence in a way she hadn't been able to access for 3 years. Physical closeness had been fraught with anxiety for so long that she'd forgotten the simple pleasure of relaxing into someone else's strength. "I want to call Dr. Morrison," she said. "I want to tell her about this morning and ask if it means what I hope it means. We'll call her this afternoon. First, let's see how you feel as the day progresses." They moved through their morning routine with careful optimism, both afraid to assume too much, while unable to suppress the hope building between them. Sandra showered without bracing against pain, dressed without strategic accommodation for physical limitations, and descended to breakfast feeling more like herself than she had in years. Her coffee tasted better. The morning news seemed less apocalyptic. Even mundane conversations carried an undercurrent of joy that had been absent from their daily interactions for far too long. "I have 3 client meetings today," Sandra said, checking her schedule. "If this feeling lasts, they might actually see me at full capacity for the first time in months. Just remember that healing isn't necessarily linear. Don't push too hard. If you start feeling symptoms, return." "I won't." "But Liam, what if this is it? What if we actually won?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to explore. If Sandra was genuinely healing, if the pain that had redefined their marriage was finally retreating, what did that mean for their relationship? How did 2 people navigate the return of possibilities they'd learned to live without? By noon, Sandra felt certain this wasn't temporary relief. Her body moved with an ease she'd almost forgotten. Her mind felt clearer than it had in months, and her energy levels reminded her of who she'd been before chronic pain became her constant companion. The client meetings went brilliantly. Sandra found herself engaging with creative challenges and strategic problems with an intellectual agility that surprised even her. Without pain demanding constant attention, her mind was free to work at full capacity for the first time in years. "You seem different today," her assistant Rachel observed. "More present, I guess. I feel more present, more like myself. It's good to see. We've all been worried about you, though you've done an amazing job hiding whatever you've been dealing with." That evening, Sandra called Dr. Morrison from Liam's study using the secure video connection that had become routine for their consultations. "Sandra, you look wonderful," Dr. Morrison said immediately. "There's something different about your posture, your facial expression. Tell me what you're experiencing." Sandra described her pain-free day in detail, noting every sensation and absence of sensation with the precision of someone who'd become an expert in cataloging her own suffering. Dr. Morrison listened carefully, occasionally asking specific questions about mobility, energy levels, and emotional responses. "This is very encouraging," she said finally. "Based on your latest lab results and imaging studies, combined with what you're reporting today, I believe you've reached a significant turning point." "Does this mean I'm actually getting better? Not just managing symptoms, but healing?" "I think it means the combination of treatments we've been using has addressed the underlying inflammatory processes that were causing your pain. Your body appears to be responding exactly as we hoped it would." Sandra felt tears threatening, not from pain, but from relief so profound it seemed to reorganize everything she thought she knew about her future. "What happens now?" "We continue with the current protocol for another month, then gradually reduce interventions while monitoring your progress. If you maintain this level of improvement, we can start discussing long-term management strategies that require minimal ongoing treatment." After ending the call, Sandra sat in Liam's study, feeling like a different person than the one who'd entered 6 months ago. The woman who'd been desperate enough to propose bringing another person into their marriage had been replaced by someone who was beginning to believe in possibilities again. Liam found her there an hour later, staring out at the city lights with an expression of quiet amazement. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I'm thinking about who we might become now," she said. "We've spent 3 years learning to live with limitations. I'm not sure I remember how to live without them. Then we'll learn together, the same way we learned everything else." As they prepared for bed, Sandra realized she was looking forward to sleeping beside her husband, without the careful positioning and strategic distance that had become habitual. Tonight, she might simply be a woman sharing a bed with the man she loved, rather than a patient managing symptoms while trying to maintain intimacy. The possibility felt almost too precious to believe. But for the first time in 3 years, Sandra allowed herself to hope for more than just endurance. Chapter 7: The Double Confession. The truth isn't just about what happened, it's about who you became in the process. Sandra stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Liam's study, watching the city pulse with evening energy while gathering courage for a conversation that would reshape everything between them. 2 weeks had passed since her breakthrough morning, and each pain-free day had strengthened her conviction that real healing was possible. But more importantly, those same 2 weeks had revealed something she couldn't ignore. The elaborate coordination behind her treatment suggested Liam's involvement went far beyond what he'd acknowledged. "You've been managing a lot more than I realized, haven't you?" she said without turning from the window. Liam looked up from the financial reports he'd been reviewing, but Sandra could see his reflection in the glass, the immediate alertness that meant she'd touched on something significant. "What do you mean?" "What? I mean the perfectly timed specialist consultations, the custom medications that arrive exactly when needed, the seamless coordination between doctors who supposedly don't communicate with each other." Sandra turned to face him directly, her expression carrying the analytical intensity that had built her marketing empire. She'd spent 2 weeks putting together pieces of a puzzle that revealed a campaign more sophisticated than anything she'd ever managed for her most demanding clients. Dr. Morrison mentioned she'd been collaborating with specialists I've never heard of. Dr. Santos referenced lab results I don't remember providing. The physical therapy equipment appeared in our bedroom like magic. The nutrition specialist who called me seemed to know details about my condition that I'd never shared with anyone. She moved closer to his desk, her voice carrying certainty rather than accusation. You've been running a campaign, haven't you? Not just supporting my treatment, but orchestrating it. Liam closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, recognizing the futility of partial truths when Sandra was in full investigative mode. He'd seen this expression countless times, the focused intensity she brought to unraveling complex marketing challenges, the relentless pursuit of facts that made her so dangerous in boardroom negotiations. How much do you know? I know enough to realize I've been seeing only the surface of what you've actually been doing. I want to know the rest. Liam opened his desk drawer and withdrew the encrypted tablet that had become his constant companion for 6 months. He unlocked it and turned the screen toward Sandra, revealing files, schedules, contact lists, and coordination notes that represented hundreds of hours of work. Project Restoration, Sandra read aloud. You gave it a code name. I gave it the attention it deserved. Your healing became my primary focus. Sandra took the tablet and began scrolling through the files, her expression shifting from surprise to amazement as she grasped the scope of what Liam had orchestrated. Her marketing background helped her recognize the sophisticated structure behind what she'd experienced as seamless medical care. You've been coordinating with 12 specialists across 4 countries. You've spent, Liam, the financial investment alone must be staggering. She continued reading, discovering details that revealed the depth of his commitment. Custom pharmaceutical compounds developed specifically for her case. Research funding provided to experimental treatment programs. A network of medical professionals who'd essentially become her personal healthcare consortium. Money well spent. You turned my medical care into a military operation. I turned your medical care into a coordinated effort by the best minds available. Most patients get whatever specialist they can access locally. You got customized treatment by experts who normally never collaborate. Sandra continued reading, discovering details that humbled her understanding of what love could look like in practice. She found evidence of round-the-clock coordination, emergency protocols for potential complications, even backup treatment plans in case primary approaches failed. You've had teams of people working exclusively on my case. You've been funding research into treatments that don't even exist yet. I've been using every resource at my disposal to give you the best possible chance of getting your life back. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to focus on healing, not on managing the logistics of healing. And because, Liam paused, choosing his words carefully, because I needed you to want to get better for yourself, not because you felt obligated to justify my investment. Sandra set down the tablet and looked at her husband with new eyes. The man she'd lived with for 6 years, who she thought she knew completely, had been conducting a shadow campaign of such sophistication that it humbled every business strategy she'd ever developed. The scope was breathtaking. She found records of video conferences with specialists at 3 a.m. to accommodate time zone differences. Documentation of pharmaceutical research he'd commissioned. Travel arrangements for flying in equipment and experts from around the world. A level of coordination that would have challenged Fortune 500 companies with entire departments devoted to project management. When did you sleep? When did you handle your actual job? When did you have time for anything except managing my recovery? Majid, I made time for what mattered most. Liam, you've essentially put your entire life on hold to fight a battle I thought I was fighting alone. You were never fighting alone. You were fighting the medical battle. I was fighting everything else, the research, the coordination, the logistics, the financial planning, the strategic oversight. Sandra felt something profound shifting in her understanding of their relationship. For 3 years, she'd seen herself as the weak link, the broken component that was dragging down their partnership. But looking at the evidence of Liam's campaign, she realized she'd been wrong about who she was in their marriage. "I haven't been a burden," she said slowly. "I've been a cause worth fighting for. You've been the most important cause I'll ever fight for." Sandra moved around the desk to stand beside Liam's chair, her hand settling on his shoulder. She could feel the tension he'd been carrying, the physical toll of months spent managing such an intensive campaign while maintaining the appearance of normal business operations. "I have a confession too," she said quietly. "I knew. Not the details, not the scope, but I knew you were doing more than you were telling me." Liam looked up at her with surprise. Those perfectly timed appointments didn't happen by accident. The specialists who seemed to know things about my case they shouldn't have known. The medications that arrived exactly when Dr. Morrison mentioned them. The way every piece of equipment we needed somehow appeared exactly when we needed it. Sandra's smile carried gratitude and something deeper, recognition of partnership that operated on levels she was only beginning to understand. "I knew you were orchestrating something remarkable, and I let you think I didn't notice because I understood you needed to do it. Just like you let me maintain my dignity by not telling me exactly how much you were managing behind the scenes. You knew. I knew you loved me enough to move mountains. I just didn't realize you'd actually moved so many of them." Sandra gestured toward the tablet, where evidence of his extraordinary effort was laid out in meticulous detail. "This represents more work than most people put into their entire careers. You managed a global medical consortium while running a billion-dollar company, and somehow made it all look effortless." It wasn't effortless. It was necessary and impossible, yet you made it happen. Do you realize what kind of person that makes you? Liam shook his head, uncomfortable with praise for what he considered simply doing what any husband would do for the woman he loved. "It makes you the kind of person who doesn't accept defeat. The kind of person who sees impossible situations as problems to be solved, rather than realities to be endured. The kind of person I fell in love with 6 years ago, and somehow love even more deeply now." They stood together in the quiet of his study, surrounded by evidence of the campaign that had reclaimed Sandra's health, and in the process, revealed depths of partnership neither had fully understood before. "What happens now?" Sandra asked. "Do we go back to normal? Do we pretend the last 6 months were just an interruption in our regular life? We go forward, as the people we've become through this experience. And who have we become?" Liam considered the question seriously. "We've become people who know what we're capable of when everything is at stake. We've become partners who trust each other to handle whatever part of a crisis we're best equipped for. We've become people who don't give up on each other," Sandra added. "We always were those people. We just proved it to ourselves." Sandra leaned down and kissed her husband's forehead, a gesture of gratitude and recognition. "I love you for everything you did," she said. "But mostly I love you for understanding that I needed to be strong enough to heal, not rescued from having to heal. You were always strong enough. I just made sure you had every advantage possible while you proved it." As they prepared to leave the study, Sandra paused at the doorway and looked back at the evidence of Liam's extraordinary campaign. "There's one more thing," she said. "I want to celebrate what we've accomplished. Not just my healing, but what we've learned about what we can do together when it really matters." "What did you have in mind?" Sandra's smile carried possibilities that had been absent from their relationship for 3 years. "I want to go somewhere beautiful and rediscover who we are when we're not fighting for survival. I want to remember what it feels like to simply be happy together." "Where do you want to go?" "Somewhere we can be alone. Somewhere we can start the next chapter of our story. As they turned off the lights and headed toward their bedroom, Sandra felt the weight of 3 years lifting from her shoulders, replaced by anticipation for discoveries that lay ahead. Chapter 8, The Weekend. Escape. Some moments are too precious for ordinary places. Sandra had chosen the location with the same strategic precision she applied to marketing campaigns. But this time, the goal wasn't capturing market share. It was capturing the possibility of rebuilding intimacy that had been dormant for 3 years. The cabin sat on 50 private acres in the Catskill Mountains, accessible only by a winding dirt road that seemed designed to leave the ordinary world behind. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of rolling hills painted in the deep greens of late spring, while the interior combined rustic charm with sophisticated comfort. Sandra had researched dozens of properties before settling on this one. It needed to be isolated enough for complete privacy, beautiful enough to inspire romance, and luxurious enough to match the significance of what they were attempting to reclaim. But more than that, it needed to feel like neutral territory, not their penthouse with its careful boundaries and medical accommodations, but a space where they could rediscover each other without the weight of recent history. "How did you find this place?" Liam asked as they carried their bags from the car. "Research. The same way I find everything else I need." Sandra had spent weeks identifying the perfect location, reading reviews, studying photographs, even having her assistant conduct a virtual tour to ensure every detail met her exacting standards. This weekend represented more than a romantic getaway. It was the culmination of months of healing, the first real test of whether their marriage could reclaim its complete intimacy. The drive from Manhattan had taken 3 hours, but Sandra felt like they'd traveled much further. Without the constant buzz of city energy and professional demands, she could focus entirely on the man beside her and the careful hope building between them. During the drive, they talked about everything except what they both knew this weekend represented. Safe topics, business developments, mutual friends, books they'd been reading. But Sandra had caught Liam glancing at her during quiet moments, his expression carrying the same mixture of anticipation and uncertainty she felt building in her own chest. "No phones this weekend," she announced, powering down her device with theatrical finality. "No email, no business calls, no outside world. Just us." Liam followed her example, silencing the technology that normally commanded his constant attention. "David knows not to contact me unless Manhattan is literally burning. Even then, he can handle it." The cabin's interior exceeded even Sandra's expectations. The main room featured a stone fireplace, large enough to heat the entire space, surrounded by furniture that invited relaxation. Rich leather sofas faced windows that framed the mountain landscape like living artwork. The kitchen was equipped for serious cooking, with professional-grade appliances and a wine collection that suggested the owner understood the importance of proper accompaniment to romantic evenings. But most importantly, every detail spoke to intimacy, from the wine collection Sandra had arranged to be stocked in advance, to the flowers she'd had delivered that morning, to the playlist streaming softly through concealed speakers. She'd chosen music from their early relationship, songs that had been the soundtrack to their courtship and early marriage. "You've planned this very thoroughly," Liam observed, recognizing the hallmarks of Sandra's organizational style. "I've planned the setting. What happens in the setting is up to us." Sandra moved to the kitchen and withdrew a bottle of wine she'd selected specifically for this moment. A Bordeaux they'd shared on their honeymoon, back when their future seemed unlimited and their love felt capable of conquering any obstacle. She'd searched for months to find the exact vintage, determined that every detail should carry meaning. "I thought we should start with something familiar," she said, offering Liam the corkscrew. As he opened the wine, Sandra stood at the window watching late afternoon shadows stretch across the valley. For the first time in 3 years, She felt genuinely excited about spending unstructured time with her husband, not managing symptoms, not navigating careful boundaries, not pretending everything was normal, while fighting private battles, just being together because they wanted to be. The afternoon light streaming through the windows turned everything golden. Liam's profile as he worked with the wine, the rich wood of the furniture, the landscape outside that seemed to stretch endlessly toward horizons that promised new beginnings. Sandra felt like she was seeing beauty again after years of being too focused on pain to notice the world around her. "To new chapters," Liam said, offering her a glass. "To remembering why we wrote the first chapters," Sandra countered. They settled on the couch facing the windows, the wine warming them as much as the late sunlight streaming through the glass. Sandra tucked her legs beneath her and turned to study Liam's profile as he watched the mountain landscape. Even in casual clothes, jeans and a sweater that made him look younger than his 35 years, he radiated the quiet strength that had first attracted her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How long it's been since we've had time like this. Unscheduled time where we don't have to be anywhere or manage anything. 3 years, 4 months and 16 days, Sandra said without hesitation. Liam turned to look at her with surprise. "That's how long it's been since we spent a weekend together without my condition being part of the agenda." "I know because I've been counting. And now? Now we're here, and I'm not in pain, and you're not worried about me being in pain, and we can just be ourselves." They talked as the sun set, conversation flowing with an ease that reminded Sandra why she'd fallen in love with Liam's mind before everything else. He was brilliant and funny and deeply thoughtful, qualities that had been overshadowed by years of careful navigation around her medical issues. She found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months, the sound filling the cabin with life. Sandra prepared dinner while Liam built a fire, both of them moving with domestic harmony that felt simultaneously familiar and rediscovered. The simple pleasure of cooking together, of sharing tasks without medical calculations, felt like reclaiming territory they'd lost without realizing how much they'd missed it. She'd chosen the menu carefully, dishes they'd enjoyed during their early relationship, foods that held good memories, but weren't so elaborate as to require all her attention. She wanted to focus on Liam, on conversation, on rediscovering the easy partnership that had once been second nature. Over dinner, they talked about everything except the journey that had brought them here. Sandra shared new ideas for expanding her marketing firm internationally. Liam described acquisition opportunities he was considering. They debated books they'd been reading, movies they wanted to see, places they might travel, normal couple conversations, simple pleasures that had been casualties of their medical crisis. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoy talking with you," Sandra said over dessert. "Really talking, not just coordinating schedules and managing logistics. We're good at talking together, always have been. We're good at a lot of things together." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with implications they were both aware of, but neither quite ready to address directly. As they finished cleaning up, Sandra felt nervousness mixing with anticipation in her chest. The evening was approaching the moment she'd been planning for, hoping for, and simultaneously fearing for months. "Sandra," Liam said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. "We don't have to—" "Yes, we do," she interrupted. "Not because we have to prove anything or meet any expectations, but because I want to, because I've wanted to for 3 years, and now I finally can." She moved closer to where he stood by the kitchen counter, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, close enough to remember exactly why his proximity had always affected her so profoundly. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "It's been so long, and what if— then we'll figure it out. The same way we've figured out everything else." Liam's hands settled on her waist, a gesture so natural and yet so significant after years of careful physical boundaries. "We have all night, and all tomorrow, and all the time we need," he continued. No pressure, no expectations, no agenda, except being together in whatever way feels right. Sandra leaned into his touch, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how natural it felt to share space without calculation or accommodation. "I love you," she said, the words carrying weight accumulated over 3 years of careful distance. "I love you too, all of you, always." As they moved toward the bedroom, Sandra felt like she was walking toward a door that had been locked for years and was finally opening again, not just to physical intimacy, but to the complete partnership they'd built their marriage on. The mountain night settled around the cabin like a protective embrace, offering them privacy and time to rediscover what they thought might be lost forever. Sandra paused at the bedroom doorway and looked back at Liam, seeing in his expression the same mixture of love, desire, and careful hope she felt building in her own chest. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "I've been ready for 3 years, he replied. "But only if you are." Sandra took his hand and led him into the room where they would finally reclaim the complete intimacy that had been the foundation of their love story from the very beginning. Chapter 9. The Reunion of Souls. True intimacy isn't about bodies, it's about souls recognizing their home. The bedroom was bathed in soft lamplight and moonshine filtering through windows that framed the mountain landscape like a painting. Sandra stood beside the bed, her heart racing with an anticipation she hadn't felt in 3 years, mixed with nervousness about whether her body would remember how to respond to desire instead of pain. The room itself seemed designed for this moment. Rustic wooden beams overhead, a stone accent wall that caught and reflected the warm light, and windows that offered complete privacy while connecting them to the natural world beyond. The bed was positioned to take advantage of both the mountain views and the fireplace visible through the open doorway, creating an atmosphere of intimacy surrounded by beauty. Liam approached slowly, his grey eyes holding hers with the kind of intensity that had first captured her attention at that conference years ago. But this intensity was different, deeper, tempered by everything they'd endured together, enriched by the knowledge of what they'd almost lost and what they were now reclaiming. "Sandra," he said quietly, her name carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar lines while rediscovering the simple pleasure of touching him without strategic calculation. His skin was warm beneath her palm, real and solid and present in a way that made her feel anchored after years of feeling adrift. The touch was electric in ways Sandra had forgotten were possible. For 3 years, physical contact had been careful, calculated, limited. Now the simple act of caressing her husband's face felt revolutionary, like reclaiming territory that had been under occupation by fear and pain. "I'd forgotten," she whispered. "What?" "How you look at me. Like I'm everything you want to see." "You are everything I want to see." Liam's hands settled on her waist. The same gesture from earlier, but with new meaning here, in the privacy of their temporary sanctuary. Sandra leaned into his touch, testing her body's response, and feeling relief flood through her when desire stirred instead of pain. The relief was profound, almost overwhelming. For months, Sandra had wondered if her capacity for physical pleasure had been permanently damaged, if the neural pathways that once carried sensation from touch to arousal had been rewired by chronic pain. But standing here in Liam's arms, she felt her body responding with an eagerness that surprised her. They kissed with the careful passion of people rediscovering something precious they'd feared was broken beyond repair. Sandra felt her body responding with an eagerness that surprised her. Nerve endings that had been devoted to cataloguing pain, suddenly remembering their capacity for pleasure. The kiss deepened gradually, neither of them rushing toward anything beyond this moment of reconnection. Sandra marveled at how natural it felt, how her body seemed to remember exactly how to fit against Liam's, despite the long separation from intimacy. Her hands found their way to his shoulders, then his chest, relearning the geography of the man she'd married. The kiss deepened, and Sandra felt 3 years of careful distance dissolving into present-moment connection. Liam's hands moved across her back, relearning territory that had been forbidden for so long, while Sandra allowed herself to simply feel without monitoring, without calculating, without preparing for inevitable discomfort. "Is this okay?" Liam asked against her lips, his voice rough with restraint. "It's perfect," Sandra replied, meaning it completely. They undressed each other slowly, not with the urgent passion of their early relationship, but with something deeper, reverence, for bodies that had carried them through crisis, and were now offering the possibility of joy again. Sandra felt self-conscious for only a moment before Liam's expression banished any uncertainty. He looked at her with the same appreciation he'd always shown, but now it was layered with gratitude and wonder that made her feel beautiful in ways that transcended physical appearance. "You're magnificent," he said, his hands tracing paths across her skin that sent shivers of pleasure through nerve endings she'd forgotten could feel anything but pain. The words carried weight beyond simple compliment. Sandra heard in them recognition not just of her physical form, but of everything she'd endured to reach this moment. She was magnificent, not despite her struggle with chronic pain, but because of her courage in fighting through it to reclaim this part of herself. They moved together onto the bed, the mountain night wrapping around them like a blessing. Sandra's body responded to Liam's touch with an eagerness that amazed her, muscles relaxing instead of tensing, sensation building toward pleasure instead of retreating from pain. For the first time in 3 years, Sandra allowed herself to be completely present in physical intimacy instead of managing it from a careful psychological distance. She felt like she was returning to herself, reclaiming territory that had been surrendered to medical necessity. Every sensation felt heightened, as if her nervous system was celebrating its return to normal function. The texture of Liam's skin beneath her fingertips, the warmth of his breath against her neck, the solid reality of his presence, all of it combined into an experience that was both familiar and miraculous. Liam moved with careful attention to her responses, reading her body's signals with the same focus he brought to complex business negotiations. But this wasn't about winning or achieving objectives. This was about reconnection, about two people rediscovering what they meant to each other when all barriers were finally removed. The careful attention touched Sandra deeply. She could see in Liam's eyes the same mixture of desire and protective concern that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. He wanted her desperately, but he wanted her comfort and pleasure even more. The combination of passion and tenderness made her feel cherished in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. "I love you," Sandra whispered as sensation built between them, the words carrying acknowledgement not just of feeling but of choice, of commitment renewed through crisis and emerging stronger. "I love you," Liam replied, his voice thick with emotion that went beyond physical pleasure to encompass everything they'd survived and everything they were reclaiming. Their reunion was tender and passionate simultaneously, bodies remembering rhythms they'd feared were lost, while hearts opened to intimacy that encompassed more than physical connection. Sandra felt pieces of herself that had been hidden away for 3 years emerging into the light. Aspects of her identity that existed only in complete partnership with this man. As they moved together, Sandra realized this wasn't just about resuming physical intimacy. It was about reclaiming their complete relationship. The intellectual partnership, the emotional support, the shared dreams, the simple pleasure of being together because they chose each other every day. And now, finally, the physical expression of love that bound everything else together. The reconnection felt like coming home after a long exile. Sandra's body responded with increasing confidence, remembering not just the mechanics of intimacy, but the emotional resonance that made it meaningful. She felt beautiful, powerful, completely herself for the first time in 3 years. The mountain cabin held them in perfect privacy as they rediscovered each other with the patience of people who understood they had time, who had learned through crisis that what mattered wasn't performance, but presence, not perfection, but connection. Sandra felt her body building toward sensations she'd almost forgotten were possible. Pleasure that existed without the shadow of anticipated pain. Intimacy that felt like coming home after a long journey through foreign territory. When release finally claimed them, it came not as conquest, but as gift. Bodies and hearts and souls reuniting in acknowledgement of love that had survived everything and emerged not just intact, but deeper than before. The climax was profound in ways that transcended physical satisfaction. For Sandra, it represented the final victory over the condition that had tried to steal this fundamental part of her identity. For both of them, it was confirmation that their love was indeed stronger than any obstacle they might face. Afterward, they lay entwined in the lamplight, Sandra's head on Liam's chest, while his fingers traced lazy patterns across her shoulder. The silence between them was comfortable, full of satisfaction and wonder, and the simple pleasure of being together without agenda or anxiety. "How do you feel?" Liam asked eventually. "Like myself again. Like us again. Did anything hurt?" Sandra smiled against his chest. Nothing hurt. Everything felt exactly like it should. They talked quietly as the night deepened around them. Conversations that wandered from practical concerns to philosophical observations to simple expressions of gratitude for what they'd reclaimed. "What happens when we go back to the city?" Sandra asked. "We keep building on this. We keep choosing each other. We keep believing that what we have is worth fighting for. And if the medical issues return, then we fight them again, together, with everything we've learned about what we're capable of when everything matters." Sandra turned to look at Liam directly, seeing in his expression the same mixture of satisfaction and anticipation she felt. "I feel like we're different people than we were 3 years ago," she said. "We are different people. Stronger people. People who know what we can survive and what we refuse to accept." The truth of his words settled around them like a benediction. They had been tested in ways that destroyed many relationships, yet they had emerged not just intact, but transformed. The couple lying in this mountain cabin was stronger, more committed, more aware of the precious nature of what they shared than the couple who had entered this crisis 3 years ago. As sleep finally claimed them, Sandra felt profound gratitude, not just for physical healing, but for emotional renewal, for partnership that had been tested beyond most limits and had emerged not just intact, but enriched by everything they'd endured together. The mountain night settled around their cabin like a benediction, holding them in perfect privacy while they began the next chapter of their love story. Chapter 10, The Strongest Love. Every ending is just a beginning that knows its own strength. Sunday morning arrived with golden sunshine, streaming through the cabin windows, illuminating two people who had rediscovered not just physical intimacy, but the profound partnership that made their love story worth fighting for. Sandra woke in Liam's arms, feeling like she'd returned from a long journey to find home exactly where she'd left it, but somehow more precious for having been temporarily lost. "Good morning." "Beautiful," Liam said, his voice rough with sleep and satisfaction. "Good morning, handsome," Sandra replied, marveling at how natural it felt to wake up tangled together instead of carefully positioned to avoid triggering her pain. The morning light painted everything in shades of gold and amber, turning their intertwined bodies into living sculpture. Sandra felt a profound sense of completion, as if pieces of herself that had been scattered by years of medical crisis had finally been gathered back together. She was whole again, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually renewed in ways she was still discovering. They lay quietly for several minutes, neither wanting to disturb the perfect contentment that surrounded them like warm light. Sandra felt profoundly different than she had just 2 days earlier. Not just physically healed, but emotionally and spiritually renewed in ways she was still discovering. The silence was full rather than empty, charged with the kind of intimate peace that comes only after profound reconnection. Sandra could feel Liam's heartbeat beneath her cheek, steady and strong, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her healing. His breathing was deep and relaxed, suggesting the kind of rest he hadn't experienced in years. "Last night was," she began, then stopped, searching for words adequate to describe the experience of reclaiming something she'd feared was lost forever. "Perfect," Liam finished. "It was perfect because it was us, all of us, finally together again." Sandra traced patterns across Liam's chest, her fingers rediscovering territory that had been forbidden for 3 years. The simple pleasure of casual intimacy, of touching him without calculation or accommodation, felt like a luxury she'd never take for granted again. His skin was warm and familiar beneath her fingertips, marked by the subtle changes 3 years had brought, but fundamentally unchanged in all the ways that mattered. She found the small scar on his shoulder from a childhood accident, the freckle near his collarbone that she'd always found inexplicably endearing, the places where her touch made him shiver with pleasure. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted, "for pain to return, or complications to arise, or something to remind me that this might be temporary. And if it is temporary, then we'll fight again." "But Liam, I don't think it is temporary. I think we actually won." The conviction in her voice surprised them both. For 3 years, Sandra had been cautious about hope, afraid to believe in possibilities beyond careful management of limitations. But lying here in the aftermath of complete intimacy, she felt certain that her healing was real and lasting. Sandra sat up, looking out at the mountain landscape that had provided the perfect backdrop for their reunion. In the morning light, everything looked possible. The rolling hills suggested journeys yet to be taken. The clear sky promised weather for any adventure they chose to pursue. The view from their window encompassed wilderness that seemed to stretch infinitely, unmarked by the medical complexes and specialists' offices that had defined so much of their recent experience. Here, surrounded by natural beauty in each other, they could imagine a future defined by possibilities rather than limitations. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked, following her gaze to the windows. "I'm thinking about all the things we can do now that we couldn't do before. Travel without medical considerations. Make love spontaneously instead of planning around my pain levels. Focus on building our dreams instead of managing my limitations. We built plenty of dreams while managing your limitations, but imagine what we can build now that we don't have to manage them anymore." The possibilities felt endless. Sandra envisioned weekend getaways planned around pleasure rather than medical appointments, evenings that ended in spontaneous intimacy rather than careful accommodation, mornings that began with desire rather than pain assessment. The future stretched before them like an unwritten love story, ready for whatever adventures they chose to pursue. They made breakfast together, the domestic harmony feeling both familiar and rediscovered. Sandra moved with an ease and energy that reminded her why she'd been successful in business. When she wasn't devoting mental resources to pain management, her mind operated with clarity and focus that could tackle any challenge. The simple act of preparing food together took on significance beyond mere nourishment. Every shared task, Liam brewing coffee while Sandra prepared fruit. Through their synchronized movements around the kitchen, the easy conversation punctuated by spontaneous touches felt like a celebration of restored partnership. Over coffee, they talked about practical matters, returning to work, resuming normal schedules, explaining Sandra's improved condition to friends and family who'd watched her struggle for 3 years. But beneath the logistical discussions ran a current of excitement about returning to New York as people transformed by their experience. "I want to tell people what we learned," Sandra said. "Not the medical details, but the relationship lessons. How we supported each other through crisis. How you can fight for someone without trying to rescue them. How love looks different during emergencies, but doesn't become less powerful. You want to help other couples facing medical challenges. I want to share what we learned about what's possible. When you refuse to accept defeat." The idea excited Sandra in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her experience with endometriosis, painful as it had been, had taught her things about resilience and partnership that could benefit others facing similar struggles. She could imagine writing articles, speaking at conferences, maybe even starting a foundation to support couples navigating medical challenges. Liam reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar circles across her knuckles. The gesture was the same one that had comforted her during their darkest moments, but now it carried celebration rather than consolation. "I'm proud of you," he said, "not just for healing, but for how you handled everything. You were strong even when you felt weak. You kept fighting even when fighting seemed hopeless. I'm proud of us for figuring out how to be partners even when partnership looked completely different than we'd planned." The pride was mutual and well-earned. They had navigated territory that destroyed many relationships, yet they had emerged not just intact, but stronger. The love that had brought them together had proven deep enough to sustain them through the worst crisis they could imagine. As they prepared to pack and return to Manhattan, Sandra felt reluctant to leave the cabin that had witnessed their reunion. This place would always represent the weekend they reclaimed their complete relationship. The setting where they proved that love could survive anything and emerge stronger. But the reluctance was tempered by excitement about returning to their real life as people transformed by their experience. The penthouse would be the same. Their offices would hold the same challenges. But they would approach everything with the knowledge of what they were capable of when everything was at stake. "We can come back," Liam said, reading her expression. "Whenever we want to remember what we accomplished here, or we can remember it every day in how we choose to be together." The drive back to the city passed in comfortable conversation, both of them savoring the last hours of their retreat while anticipating their return to normal life. Sandra watched the landscape change from rural mountains to suburban developments to urban density, but her focus remained on the man beside her and the future they could build together now that all possibilities had been restored. As Manhattan's skyline came into view, Sandra felt a surge of excitement rather than the trepidation she might have expected. The city that had witnessed their courtship and marriage would now witness their renewal, their emergence as people who had faced the impossible and won. "Liam," she said as their building came into sight, "I need you to know something important." "What's that?" "The woman who suggested bringing Marilyn into our marriage, that wasn't really me. That was someone I became when I forgot who I actually am." "And who are you actually?" Sandra smiled, feeling the certainty that had built her career and won Liam's heart in the first place. "I'm someone who doesn't settle for less than everything. Someone who fights for what matters instead of accepting compromises. Someone who believes that the right partnership can overcome any obstacle. You're also someone who loves deeply enough to consider sacrificing everything for someone else's happiness. But I'm smart enough to recognize that real love doesn't require those kinds of sacrifices. Real love finds solutions instead of settlements." As they reached their building, Sandra felt like they were returning not to their old life, but to a new chapter of their continuing story. The penthouse would be the same. Their careers would resume their familiar rhythms. But everything would be different because they were different. People who had fought impossible battles and won. Partners who had discovered depths of commitment and capability that would serve them for whatever challenges the future might hold. "I love you." "Liam Neeson," Sandra said as they entered their apartment, using his full name like a declaration. "I love you, Sandra Williams Neeson," he replied, his use of her complete married name acknowledging everything they'd preserved and everything they'd reclaimed. That evening, as they prepared for bed in their own bedroom, Sandra realized that their story wasn't ending with restored health and renewed intimacy. Those were victories, but they were also foundations for whatever came next. The return to their own space felt like a homecoming charged with new possibilities. Their bedroom, which had been a careful arrangement of accommodations and limitations, now felt like a sanctuary where anything was possible. Sandra could imagine spontaneous morning intimacy, evenings that ended in passionate connection, nights devoted to exploring the renewed chemistry between them. "What do you want to do tomorrow?" she asked, as they settled into bed together. "I want to wake up next to you without wondering if you're in pain. I want to have coffee together and plan normal things like weekend trips and dinner parties and all the mundane pleasures we put on hold for 3 years. And after that, we keep building the life we want, together, with the knowledge that we can survive anything because we've already survived the worst we could imagine." Sandra curled against Liam's side, feeling the solid reality of his presence and the profound security that came from partnership that had been tested beyond most limits and had emerged not just intact, but stronger. The future stretched before them, unlimited by medical concerns or careful boundaries. They could travel anywhere, try anything, build whatever dreams they chose to pursue. But more than the specific possibilities, what excited Sandra was the knowledge that they would face everything together, with love that had proven stronger than any challenge. "Do you think other couples could learn from what we went through?" she asked. "I think other couples could learn from what we refused to accept. We didn't accept that medical challenges had to destroy intimacy. We didn't accept that temporary limitations had to become permanent boundaries. We didn't accept that love meant settling for less than everything." As sleep approached, Sandra reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain that had nearly destroyed them had ultimately revealed the strength of what they'd built together. The crisis that had threatened their marriage had become the proving ground that demonstrated its unshakable foundation. "Sweet dreams, my love," Liam whispered as Sandra settled into sleep. "Sweet dreams," she replied, meaning it completely for the first time in 3 years. They slept peacefully in each other's arms, two people who had fought impossible battles and won. Partners who had discovered that the strongest love isn't love that never faces challenges. It's love that faces every challenge and refuses to be defeated. Their story continued, not with the desperate hope of people trying to survive crisis, but with the confident joy of people who knew they could overcome anything because they'd already proven what they were capable of when everything that mattered was at stake. Outside their windows, Manhattan pulsed with its endless energy, the city that had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, their crisis, and their victory. Inside their bedroom, Sandra and Liam began the next chapter of their love story with hearts full of gratitude for what they'd preserved and excitement for what they would build together in all the years ahead. Love had won, not through avoiding difficulty, but through refusing to be defeated by it. And that, Sandra thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the strongest foundation any relationship could ask for.